people who are missing in action for a while. What happened? One time I went to a hangout in my college dorm with some friends. I didn't have a cell phone back then, until 2004, because in those days every dorm room had home phones. Eventually, I was invited to a guy's house. We went to his place and slept together. When I woke up the next day, I went to my email through his computer and saw an unimaginable number of messages from my friends. They thought I had been drugged and kidnapped. There was also the option that I had drunk myself out. I was suffering from depression at the time. As it turned out later, they filed a missing persons report with campus security, and some of my friends even went looking for me in the woods. Who's too lazy to read? My friends think I'd rather be kidnapped by someone than fucked. One night when I was 10 years old, I started sleepwalking. I opened the front door and went wandering around the neighborhood. I ended up waking up hours later, standing barefoot in the middle of an unfamiliar street that ended in a dead end. I was scared shitless. I ended up running down the street until I finally found my way home. My folks also laid bricks while they were trying to find me. After that, they put a lock on my door, and my moonlight walks were over. I had a similar thing happen. I woke up in my underwear, standing in the driveway outside our house in the middle of January. It's pretty cold here in Montana at that time. I got really scared and started pounding on the door for my parents to open. Corrected. We had this weird old-fashioned door that opened from the inside, but if you were outside, you needed a key. I probably pulled the deadbolt back, but didn't turn the lock in the handle, and so when I came out, the door closed. It happened over winter break when I was a freshman in college. My boyfriend dumped me. I was depressed and wanted to be alone. I had a decent amount of money, so I rented a hotel room for 2 weeks, bought food and everything I needed, turned off my cell phone, and didn't even go outside. When I got home, my whole family yelled at me for hours, and I had 200 missed and 500 messages hanging on my phone. 10 out of 10, highly recommended. While serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, I had dissociative amnesia that lasted 12 days. It started on an ordinary Sunday night. I was doing laundry and getting ready to report for duty. Next thing I know, I wake up 12 days later in my room from being shaken by my commanding officer. And it turns out that for all those 12 days, no one had seen or heard me. The most interesting thing is that I was not some loner. On the contrary, I was very sociable and always on the lookout. The fact that I disappeared for 12 days is a miracle. Redacting so I don't have to reply in the comments. I was charged with unauthorized abandonment of duty, for which I went to the 15th article. It ended up being medically discharged with $25,000 compensation, and the AF psychiatrist said the AF didn't need me anymore. I had no explanation for what happened. Even after various pills and treatments, the doctors still couldn't figure out my brain. They say it rarely happens after 25, but it happened to me. When I had a CT scan of my head, the doctor said that I have one cavity, which everyone has, that is bigger than other people. But I don't want to dig into that, and I really don't want to know if I took off to France for that time and killed Chelovs by pretending to be a transvestite, or if I just fucked off somewhere for 2 weeks. I had no reason to desert. I'd been in the service for 6 years at that point. I'd been to Saudi Arabia, South Korea, France, Spain, and I was in Germany at the time. I fucking loved the service and would love to do it again. I got lost in the city when I was 4 years old and was rescued by teenagers who my father thought were a gang. We were in the company of another family having dinner in Chinatown. In addition to the adults, there were 5 of us kids. After dinner, we all held hands and crossed the street. But my older brother let go of my hand for some reason. Because of this, When the light turned green and everyone crossed the road, I stayed on the other side of the crosswalk. I just stared out the big window of a barber shop where they were shaving some huge guy's head. I can still remember that picture in great detail. When I finally looked around, the others were gone, and I started to cry. But then a group of teenagers came up to me and asked me if I was lost. I said, yes. Then a tall guy put me on his shoulders, and we walked down the street. The rest of the guys decided to split up and go their separate ways. When we rounded the corner, I saw my father. He got all pale and rushed over to us. The guy lowered me to the ground. There were a few other guys with us. They stood around awkwardly while the tall guy explained to my dad what had happened. My dad, who never showed his feelings at all, hugged the guy in emotion, and my mom came over and took my hand. Years later, my dad told me that he had already seen those guys that day when he parked outside the restaurant and also thought they were some kind of gang. And after it all happened, he felt bad about his thoughts and has since tried not to judge people on first impressions. I really wish I could thank them. But that was a long time ago. My parents were talking about something, so they didn't notice me leaving. On the way to the slide, I got completely lost. When my parents found me, I was in the company of a large, dark-skinned lady who was walking with me all over the zoo trying to find them. Both my mom and dad gave her a big hug, and the incident completely changed their opinion of dark-skinned people. It's nice to see kindness break down false beliefs. In 2010, I went on a hike to see a volcano eruption. I made it before the flights were canceled, except that on the way back, I got separated from the group. There were 8 to 10 of us, including my good buddy. Anyway, I usually move pretty fast, especially when I'm coming down the mountain. But it was March, and at that time it gets dark early in Iceland. And, as luck would have it, I didn't have a flashlight. So after half an hour, I found myself in pitch darkness. I decided to take the same path we had taken up the hill. This was an incredibly dumb idea because the trail was about 5 meters from the 15-meter cliff into the canyon. Plus, the trail wasn't far from the waterfall, so there was thick fog the whole way up. And let's not forget that it's March in Iceland, so the temperature was about -5 degrees Celsius, and that's without taking into account the cold wind. So the trail turned into a real skating rink with a 45-degree slope. The experience was incredible. It took about 5 hours before I managed to get down and find the others. As it turned out later, I was one of 20 people who got lost that Saturday. 2 of them died. The Icelandic Search and Rescue Service had a lot of work to do in those days. The people who died were a man and a woman in their 40s and 50s. They wanted to get to the top by car. Not only did they have a Suzuki Grand Vitara, which is not very suitable for such a trip, but it was also on all-season tires. Obviously, at some point they got stuck. The man went for help and left the woman and her friend in the car. When he was long gone, she went looking for him, or someone to help. And since they were dressed for the weather, they both ended up freezing to death. Basically, pretty much everyone who got lost, whether tourists or locals, were dressed too lightly. I saw a few people, locals, who had regular sneakers on their feet. I was about 2 or 3 years old. It happened at the beach when my dad and brother and I were camping. I was just going back and forth and collecting bird feathers. At some point, my dad and brother, along with the rest of the people from the campground, went back to the campground, and I just stayed further back to collect feathers for myself. After a while, my dad realized he had forgotten me on the beach, rushed back in a panic, and found me there too, with a bunch of feathers in my hands. It's not that I was missing. I'd just been forgotten. I once lost my father in a supermarket and panicked wildly. I didn't know what to do next, so I just sat down by the cereal boxes and started sobbing. In my head, I was already imagining how no one would find me, how I was living under bridges or in abandoned houses, how I was eating dead rats and insects to somehow survive. I was 8 at the time. But 5 minutes later, my dad walks past me with a cart and asks, "Well, why are you sitting here?" Mom called. "We need more milk." In high school, I went on a field trip with the American soccer team, after which we were bused back to school. I was too young to drive myself, so I had to wait for my parents to pick me up. I didn't have my cell phone with me because my parents took it away from me as punishment. I sat at school for an hour and a half, but nobody came to pick me up. In the end, I decided to walk home, about 6.5 kilometers, taking on myself all the soccer equipment and textbooks. While I was dragging myself home, my mom came to school. When she saw that I was missing, she panicked, found my coach, and told him about it. My coach immediately sent out a text message to the whole team, asking if anyone knew where I was. When I came to school the next day, it turned out that everyone thought that the bus with the team had left without me and that I had gotten lost. This situation ended up becoming our team's favorite joke, which everyone laughed about for another year. Bonus: the Rodox never took my phone away as punishment again. Corrected: responding to some of the comments, my mom visited my dad in the hospital, but she didn't tell me about it or warn me that she might be late. Yeah, I probably could have asked Coach to call her, but deep down in my conniving teenage soul, I wanted to punish my mom for leaving me without my phone. A couple years ago, I was working in Manhattan. The building where our office was located had 11 floors. One day, I went out for a smoke, and when I came back and called the elevator, there was a little blonde girl about 11 years old crying loudly. I asked her what was wrong. It turned out that she didn't speak English. I think she spoke Polish, but I'm not sure. Without stopping crying, she got off the elevator and just stared at me. I could see fear in her eyes. I walked away from the elevator with her, trying to figure out what was going on. She was wearing high-heeled shoes and a very short skirt, and she was wearing pretty bright makeup. Over and over, she repeated 7 and uncle. I was at a complete loss and didn't know what to do. I was working on the 7th floor, so I decided to bring her to our office. I thought maybe someone there would know her. But no, I ended up just walking around with her from floor to floor, asking people if they knew who this kid was. But nobody had a clue. I was about to lose all hope and was about to call the cops. But finally, we got to the 11th floor, and it turned out to be her uncle's office. When she saw him, she ran up to him screaming and crying, and he looked at me like I was some kind of pedophile. I quickly explained to him how it really was. Then it turned out that her aunt had brought her and told her the wrong floor, and she left immediately. The poor thing was very scared.